Hello, Willingdon Young Adult community. It is so good to be with you guys, and I'm excited for this new initiative, this new series that we're going to be moving into. Not only are we going to be talking about relationships for the next number of weeks here, but we're also going to be doing it in a different format. As you can see, we're going to be doing it interview style. And we're just excited to hear a lot of really impactful stories, learning from the wisdom and experience of other people, and just getting really real about such a huge part of our lives, such a huge part of what it means to be a young person is understanding relationships and how to go about things in a healthy way, whether you're single, dating, engaged, or married, whatever stage of the journey you're at. Assuming most of us are single, because that's just what it means to be a young adult a lot of the time. But yeah, again, just really excited for all that this new series might hold for us. So today, we are going to be talking about singleness, and I have my good friend April here. April, welcome. So great to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So good to be here.
Awesome. And yeah, so April's going to share a bit with us about her story today, and it's just our hope and prayer that you could be encouraged by it, and that you could learn a bit more about how to embrace singleness, the value of singleness, but I will let April share all of those things. And so April, I just want to start by asking you to share a bit about yourself, and maybe a bit of your journey of the single life and how long you've been living it for.
Absolutely. Yeah. So as you've said, my name is April. I've grown up here in the Lower Mainland. I kind of had a hybrid childhood. I grew up partly in Abbotsford, partly in Vancouver. And I think that's why by the age of 13 I felt quite comfortable walking the streets of East Hastings and shoveling cow poop.
Okay. A city country girl.
A city country girl, you could say. I grew up, so my dad was a pastor. As a pastor's kid, my sisters and I were used to having our home full of people from all walks of life. Have to say it was one of the best childhoods. I'm so thankful for that opportunity that we had. And it really showed me that family was something that was so much bigger than your biological family. So a little bit of background beyond my childhood years. When I finished high school, I decided I wanted to go and explore a little bit and kind of stretch that two-city world that I've been living in to a bit further of a geographical location. And I went and I worked in France for a year as a nanny.
Okay.
It was quite stretching. I learned French, got to learn a little bit of what it feels like to live in a different environment. And when I came back, I think I just started to realize that I had a real passion for culture, for language, and to see how God was moving in different places in the world.
Yeah, so why France, if you don't mind me asking?
I really wanted to learn French, and I love cheese. So I feel like, why not?
Those are great reasons.
And if they come together.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, and so then after that season, I kind of, as a youngest child, I had to make some decisions about my life. That's not always easy when, decisions have always been made for you.
Yeah.
But I started to pray about what God wanted for my future, and I decided to study international development right here in Burnaby at SFU.
Oh, no way.
So
represent all our SFU students?
Representing SFU students here. Great program. It was an amazing time, really stretched me. And I spent the next many years of my life, the rest of my 20s, working both locally and globally. Some of those years were with NGOs doing development projects. And some of them were working with missions organizations, so very kingdom-focused projects. And in every situation, it just seemed like God was so good to bring family to me in those different places. And as a single, I think that's really important to discover.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people think I'm like 23 when they first meet me. How old you thought I was?
Yeah, so, no joke. First time I met you, I was like, yeah, she's probably in her mid-20s or something.
Yeah.
Which is
Until
right.
you start hearing where I've worked, right?
Yeah. She's lived in 12 countries. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm actually 34.
Okay.
And I've lived these last 34 years as a daughter, as a sister, as a vessel used by God. And in all of those things, I've lived as a single woman. And so I'm just excited to share a little bit about my journey and some of the highs and lows that come with doing those years as a single.
Yeah, definitely. And just to quickly touch on all the different places you worked locally and globally.
Yeah.
About how many times did you say you moved around in that period? Or is that just like too much to
I don't
count?
count. So several times when I worked with nonprofits, I would do shorter term work kind of components. So it would be like 3 months in Burundi, a month in Rwanda, time in Cambodia. But then in France, I lived there for 2.5 years. I was in Lithuania for a little while. I've spent summers in Turkey and Iraq. So a little bit all over. And I have spent some time locally as well. And that's like mostly stints. Been here in Vancouver. So.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And like you said, God provided you family. So clearly each location that you moved, that's like a fresh start.
Absolutely.
And so you've said that you found meaningful connections along the way.
And so often that's come through just connecting into local church.
Yeah.
We all need a mom, a dad, brothers, sisters, and we don't even always have that biologically here. And so I think leaning into that aspect of the church and seeing the global family and how we can be that for each other, that was really significant for me to learn that.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So what have been some of the most life-giving aspects of singleness for you?
That is a very hard question. Remember, I'm 34. I've had a lot of time to reflect on this.
Yeah.
But I think what comes to mind first would be time. I think as a single, sometimes we actually take for granted the amount of time that we have and what a gift time can be. I have a lot of friends who are married with children, and it's crazy how sleep schedules and bathing and food times and the anxieties and worries of married life can take up so much of your time and your focus.
Yeah.
And so I think the gift of time has been an incredible blessing to me. And I think there's kind of three aspects to time that I would say are most important for me that I've experienced. The first is the time that I've had to invest in other people. So I've touched on the fact that, sometimes as a single, family outside of my biological family in different places has been really important. And I found that as a single, because I have time outside of kind of creating an inward family that I'm a part of, there's been extra time that I've had to invest in kind of like stewarding a bigger family around me. And some of the relationships with friends that I have that I would say are part of that family are people I've met in the most random places. I have friends from buses, from coffee shops, refugee friends, and I really feel like the opportunities that have opened up have been because I've had time to be present with them.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I feel really grateful for. And they are family to me, so it's a really nice gift.
Would you say that those family members have been kind of spread out all over the place, or have you had opportunities to kind of even bring some of them together to make these little pockets of pseudo families?
I'd probably say both and.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I've been overseas, there have been more opportunities to bring pockets together.
Yeah.
And then here, maybe it's been a little bit more spread out, but even then, I feel like there's always ways to connect.
Totally.
And I think everyone's looking for family.
Oh.
Everyone wants community, right? And so it's not that hard to find ways, I think, to create spaces for that. And I think another aspect of time that I think is really important is, with our time that we have an opportunity as singles to invest in our relationship with God in a really unique way. I've noticed for, having evenings that are more available or early mornings that are more available, there's been time and space for me to, go to the ocean in the morning, sit with a journal and my Bible and just spend time with Jesus, or just wonder at creation. And it's not that you can't do that when you're married, but I do think that there's just so many other things that your focus can be divided between.
Yeah.
And in that sense too, I think when you are more on your own in some aspects, you kind of need to lean into God more in that space, and it creates a unique way, I think, for God to draw you close to Him.
Yeah, kind of giving God the opportunity to truly fulfill your needs and desires, instead of being like, oh yeah, God fulfills some of them, but then I need someone else or something because God can't do that in my life.
Definitely.
And you've sensed or experienced God being that for you.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And I would say another thing about time also is, we've got so much time as singles to be creative.
Amen to that.
Like having had a good sleep, not waking up by babies or anything like that. There's projects and things that we have an opportunity to invest in because we have the time. I love writing, I love music, and so I've had opportunities to collaborate with musicians on songs. I'm currently writing a book, and it's been
amazing.
neat to kind of
which
invest
we will touch on
time.
that later. She's writing a book. I hope you heard that. We'll definitely touch on that.
Yeah, and I just think, if there's ever a time to use our creativity and our passion, it's when we're single. So that's been a huge gift.
Yeah, so using your singleness to basically just invest in more outward focused things, like more feeling less tied down, I guess, might be the way.
Absolutely. And Paul writes about that in Scripture. He says a married man is concerned about the home life and the anxieties of marriage, and same for a married woman. And so there's just a sense of freedom to use the time in a different way, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's not that one's better or worse, they're just very different.
Yeah.
So.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, it's a great point. I can remember for sure a lot of my friends that they have been, maybe struggling with spending time with God or setting blocks of time to be by themselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, just hearing about like it's because of the beauty and the burden of marriage, where you need to care for someone else, and allowing God to be that person for you as a single is, it's fantastic.
It's unique, yeah. I think something else that's been really life-giving, and I don't know if you've experienced this as well, but the gift of mobility. So part of that whole like being attached with someone and having a schedule and someone else that you are very like concerned with, in a sense. Being mobile is an amazing gift. I said that I have kind of like an extended family in many different places. Local or global, it doesn't even matter. Mobility is an incredible opportunity to go and be with people. So whether it's in Vancouver and I can just hop on my bike at any time and cycle over. Or whether it's driving to Chilliwack or taking a flight to France to visit my friends there. There's just this kind of ability to show up and be present by being mobile. I remember this one time I was actually helping run a peace camp overseas in Turkey and Iraq, and one of the refugee girls that we were working with, she explained to us that her people who had been through a really bad genocide, the only foreigners that they'd met were filming them from helicopters during their genocide.
Wow. And
having people that would actually come physically to where they were just to spend time with them. She said that meant the world to her. And I remember it kind of hit me in that moment, like, wow, my mobility as a single has allowed me to do that. And I don't know if it would have otherwise.
Right,
So that was a huge gift.
It's not like marriage would take that away entirely, but it would, at the very least, significantly limit it. Like, you can still go and do stuff like that on occasion, but not nearly the same as a single.
There's kind of like a freedom to like pick up and go, which is different in the stage of life of a single, I think.
Totally. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't you maybe have some plans to kind of pick up and go to a next stage of your journey with education?
I do, I'm looking, so I recently won a scholarship to a school in England to study peace and conflict development.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's huge.
I'm excited.
What school is this? Oxford?
It's Bradford. It's Northern England.
Nice.
It's not really a famous city, it's kind of ugly, but
but
the
it's still
education
England.
is great.
It sounds very proper and prestigious.
Exactly. I'm working on my accent, so we'll get there.
Well done. That's awesome. And so you're just going to pick up and go, basically.
And I'm going to pick up and go because I have the freedom to do that right now.
And how long is this program?
It's 15 months.
Okay. So 15 months in Bradford.
And then who knows where that will lead to from there. We'll see.
Amazing. Just a huge gift of singleness.
Absolutely, and I think that ties into this aspect of like the life of a single can be so adventurous. And that's something, not everyone embraces that, but I think it's something that if we decide we want to embrace adventure, the single life is so full of it. The possibility, I think that if we learn to dream and to hold the dreams that we've had loosely and to let God speak into those dreams, like our lives do not have to be dull. And not saying that they are in any other season of life, but I think sometimes when we fixate on, we're singles, we miss some of the opportunities that are around us to dream big. And there's so many opportunities.
No kidding. And I feel like for a lot of people, there's kind of some sort of block almost that they're kind of stuck in their singleness maybe. And not really seeing that whole wide world of opportunity. What do you think might hold people back? Or what would your encouragement be to someone who feels that way right now?
I mean, I think we have to, and I'll maybe touch on this a bit later too, but I think we have to change the way we view the direction that our lives are heading in. Because I think if we project a life that looks like everyone gets married one day, then our focus simply becomes on what is taking me in that direction versus looking at, there might be an alternative life that God has for me. And if that's the case, and when you say if, it's like all these possibilities open up. And all these other adventures and all these other experiences that could be had. But if we're fixated on this, like this is the only path that my life is heading towards, I might miss all of these other things over here. And I think that can be really sad because God might have some beautiful things in store.
Oh, so true.
One other thing I would probably say as life-giving, I mean, I honestly could go on and on.
Yeah. Apparently singleness might be a good thing in your...
But I would say too that something that's really like kind of refreshing in some ways as a single is you can take some pretty big risks. And if you fail, it doesn't always reflect on someone else.
Right.
Or on the well-being of maybe your children or your family. It's a little bit easier to try things.
Yeah.
And like you said, to pick up and go. I remember once when I was in my early 20s, I'd kind of taken a gap year in my university years.
Okay.
Because I got a scholarship to England.
Wow. Tell me about England. Just
yeah,
loves
I don't
it.
know. But that one, actually, funny story. My visa didn't come back in time, and I didn't get to go.
Oh no.
I was going to study journalism at this super rainy city. This is probably good for me.
Another
I didn't
ugly
need to
city,
go.
or?
Ugly as well. They're all ugly. I'm just kidding.
London is. Yeah.
But so I found out I didn't get my visa, and it was too late to re-register for classes here. And so I was like talking to my family, and I was like, oh, I didn't have a plan B. I only had plan A. What do I do?
Yeah.
And the next day, my dad got a phone call from a friend of his who was setting up a team to basically prepare a boat for medical missions in South America. And they needed an extra crew member.
Wow.
Now, I know nothing about boats, like nothing. I still don't feel like I know anything about boats.
Yeah.
But I flew to Boston a week later, and I spent 7 months working on a boat.
Wow.
And that trip changed my life. I met so many neat people. I worked really hard, I got really strong, but it was a really unique season of life to learn about, I can trust God in the plan Bs of what I thought was supposed to be a plan A. And he had something different.
Yeah.
But it takes risk.
Yeah.
And I think that there's ways we can risk that are big and out there, and there's a lot of ways that we can risk here as well. I think as singles, sometimes we hold back from risking because we feel like we're risking alone.
Yeah.
And I think ways that we can, risk with others. My sister and I started a book club this last year because we wanted to be more intentional with friends.
Yeah.
It feels risky to start something and you don't know if anyone will show up.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
Invite a friend into it with you.
Yeah.
Ask someone to risk with you, and it doesn't have to be a spouse. It can be a friend or someone in your community.
Yeah.
And I think it's a time to take risks.
Yeah.
So
Oh, so good.
that's just snippets of the long list.
Okay, so you're saying there is more.
There's more.
There's
but
more good
you'll have to read the
aspects.
book later.
Yeah, exactly. Read the book. It'll be in the books. A lot of it.
It's not even finished yet, and I'm promoting it.
We're gonna do book signing. No, just kidding. But that's awesome. Cool. Yeah. So what have been then, in light of all these good aspects, what have been some of the challenging aspects of the single life?
Yeah, and I think that's a good question, because I think no matter what relationship status you are in currently in your life, there's going to be things that are amazing, that you love, and there's always going to be challenges.
Yeah.
And singleness has its own set of challenges, I think, that we need to address and talk about and be open about.
Yeah.
Couple of things that have been, personally challenges for me. I think for myself, I've always kind of walked this fine line of loving marriage. I think marriage is beautiful, and of loving my singleness. And so there's occasional times in my life where I feel like I'm supposed to be somewhere that I'm not yet. And often that happens because I'm around other people that are all married, and it feels like, maybe I've missed something great because I value marriage and I have high regard for it. And so I think walking in that tension of knowing that both can be equally valid ways of living, both honoring God and both beautiful, there's a tension there sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I can feel that in my own heart, and I'm sure many other singles do as well.
Yeah, to appreciate the marriages that you see, to see it's
Yeah.
something good, it's something you could have yourself.
Yeah.
And then, the common experience, you're 34, the older
Yeah.
you get, the more people are married. So
Exactly.
you're kind of like, where
Yeah.
I value it, everyone's doing it, yet I'm not.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Totally. Yeah.
That's not easy.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into the next thing I would say as well is sometimes it can be really hard to be the odd one out. And so I've been in seasons of my life where I can honestly say, I feel really content in my singleness.
Yeah.
And then I go to a party or something, not during COVID times,
Yeah.
regular times.
Of course.
Go to a party of more than 6 people, and everyone is married with kids.
Yeah.
And it's no one's fault, and I love the stages of life that my friends are in, but the topics of conversation revolve all about marriage and children, and it's easy, I think, when you feel that you're the odd one out to start doubting yourself or your journey, or to kind of feel like, maybe I'm missing something, maybe there's something wrong with me. because I'm not like everyone else.
Yeah.
That maybe I've missed the mark somewhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think social media helps
Okay.
in that regards either, because
Yeah.
I feel like that can breed into a sense of comparison,
Right.
which can rob you of joy.
Right.
And so I just think, whatever race you're on is beautiful. And you can appreciate each other's race, but we don't need to fixate on where we are or where we aren't.
That's a really profound concept that I think kind of almost even transcends relationships and all that, is the whole like rejoicing in other people's gifts and other people's good experiences, even though you don't have it yourself per se. Like, how do you get there? Because I feel like it's a good ideal to present to people, but then to actually be at a place where you're on social media, you're seeing all your closest friends, happy marriages, children, everything's beautiful and Insta-worthy, and you don't have that. Like, how do you get to that place of truly being content for them and simultaneously being content not having it yourself?
Yeah, and I think, well, first of all, I would say social media isn't always going to be okay for everyone. Because I think if that is kind of what brings up those struggles for you, you might need to go off it.
Right.
Maybe that is the way you kind of deal with that. But I think it's the same as knowing if you've forgiven someone. If you can't pray for someone in your heart and wish them well, then maybe you haven't forgiven them.
Right.
It's a settling actually in your own side of things first. And so I think the same thing with singleness and with marriage. I know that when I'm finding my fulfillment in Christ and not in my relationship status, when my friends get engaged or when they announce that they're having a baby, my heart rejoices with them. And then actually I can really go there. If I'm really struggling in my own sense of identity and purpose, then it is actually quite hard to be excited for them. Because then it kind of feeds into more of, like, oh, I wanted that, or I'm not there, why are they there? And so I think that it's kind of a heart check more than anything.
And maybe things in seasons, like there'll be a season where you need to get off social media because you're going through some identity changes, transformation, and then seasons when you are in a more content, stable place that you can just rejoice in all those things.
Definitely.
That's good.
Other things that I think can be challenges. I think most singles that I've talked to would agree with this, but as much as the joy of being single is you can plan your life in a way where, whether it's the mission that you feel like God's called you to, or the projects that you invest in, they're suited for you, and you don't have to think about whether doing something that suits your giftings and your calling takes someone else away from theirs. It can also be a really hard aspect to it. There's something really beautiful, I think, about having a partner that does life with you. Someone who's invested. Because I think as a single, planning it, I've come to crossroads before where I'm like, all right, is it time to switch careers? Do I want to move again? Do I want to stay put for a while? And having someone that's invested, that, the next day after you've made that decision, that person's still in it with you. You don't have that in the same way as a single. You can have great community, which we really need as singles. That external family around us. And yet, as much as people can be family to you, your roommates or your friends, they might get married, they might move away. The type of commitment. It
lacks permanence.
Exactly. There's not a longevity of riding out the decisions together or of celebrating together. Right? Like the joys and the heartaches. There's a shared experience, I think, that can feel lacking sometimes as a single.
And almost like a depth of relationship that isn't there, per se.
That's exactly it.
Because it's one thing to like celebrate a milestone achievement with a new friend you just made, and it's another to celebrate with your family or with your best childhood friend that's like they've been with you through it all.
Exactly. And I think maybe that's why also as a single, dating can be hard. Because you feel like you invest in a potential relationship and it doesn't go anywhere. But I think, again, all of those things kind of just point back to, because even in marriage, there's no guarantee. Your spouse could die. Like that part is so out of our control that we have to get to the point where we see the deepest longevity of relationship is our relationship with Christ. And that's the only thing that's actually going to carry us through every season. So I think if we miss that, it doesn't matter what relationship season we're in. It's going to be rocky.
And maybe a little bit of a tangent, but even as you say that, I think about that lesson is one that's typically learned through suffering. When you realize that like the only constant in any person's life could ever be God.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like you said, it can't. Like a spouse is always there.
Yeah.
You hope.
Yes. Yeah.
But there's still nothing guaranteeing. But God will always be
Yeah.
there. And as a single, like you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, that God becomes our primary relational investment.
Yeah. And in a sense, it's like God becomes your home. And that is something that I've experienced in different ways with traveling, because there's changing of people around me constantly. I have to know where my home is.
Yes. Wow.
And when it's not always a physical location, I think that rootedness, I've always loved Jeremiah 17:7 and 8, and it talks about being like a tree that's rooted in Christ. And I think that when it talks about how fruit is still able to be produced in every season, I think that it's the same in every season of life and every season of relationship. The fruit that God can produce from our lives, it's not us producing it, it's Him producing it through us, but we have to be anchored in Him. And I think that's so key in the life of a single.
That's huge. Like, to think about you going on those 3-month mission trip stints and still feeling like you could be home. Like, it's just kind of a mind-blowing concept.
And not always easy.
True.
Definitely moments where I'm like eating a giant chocolate bar under a mosquito net. I'm like,
I
just want to go home.
Like, I want to hug my family. Totally.
But it helps to have that source that's rooted, really.
Yeah, and it is a tangible that can be invested in.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not like if you don't have God, you're untethered in a sense.
Yeah.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So even just kind of unpacking some of these challenges a bit further, getting a bit more specific, for a lot of single people, especially, I'm sure it's been this way throughout history, but in our generation, it would seem, there's a lot of unfulfilled desires. There's a lot of messages out there of how your life should look. We brought up social media, how it should look visually, and what sort of things people should be investing in. And for people, there's the unfulfilled sexual desires. Like, we're all sexual beings, and single people that see, all these people in the world doing all these wonderful things, and they can't, as a Christian, or shouldn't. That can be a really tough thing. There's also the emotional desires, like people who want someone to support them, someone to tell them that they matter, to be there for them. There's a lot of just deep personal challenges, loneliness. Like you said, you have those evenings and sometimes even days by yourself. You don't have a spouse to go to the park or on a walk or whatever with. You're just chilling. So when it comes to some of these deeper things that maybe people don't like to talk about as openly, maybe you can kind of shed some light on that for us and talk about how you've navigated some of those things in your years of experience with singleness.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe to start off, like, as you mentioned, I'm 34. I never thought I'd be 34 and not married.
Okay.
To be honest.
So your expectation going
My expectation was I'd be married right now, probably with 3 kids.
Okay.
Actually, I wanted 4 kids.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was in my early 20s, I told my friends, I want to get married when I'm 28.
Okay.
And that was old to them.
Yeah.
They all wanted to be married by 25.
Were they from Abbotsford?
They were.
That's a very Abbotsford thing.
It is very Abbotsford thing. But it's interesting how, I had this list of things I wanted to do in my head. I wanted to finish a degree. I wanted to travel. There was projects I wanted to be a part of, and some of those things did happen. And then I hit that 28 mark, and then all of a sudden, it's 30, and then it's 32, and then, I'm 34 now. This is interesting. I'm still single.
Yeah.
And so you do kind of process through those seasons of life that, there are things that you had expected or hoped for or dreamed of or longed for that don't happen. And it is a real thing that we have to decide, what do we do with unmet desires or longings that we have, whether it's emotional, physical, any of those aspects. It's going to be a challenge, I think, to address those things. A really practical example, I actually have always wanted to be a mom. Since I was younger, I thought that would be such an amazing thing to be, and I've seen my friends, my sisters all walk into that stage of motherhood, and it can be an interesting thing to think about and to kind of have that desire and be like, okay, God, so maybe I won't have that chance. I don't think people in the church always make it easy for you either. Those comments that you get sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh, the clock is ticking. Have you met anyone lately? And, we don't already know.
Oh,
right?
really? Whoa, yeah. 34, the clock is ticking.
I'm just going to bring it to your attention now in case you haven't noticed. But I think there's different ways that we have to choose to respond.
Yeah.
And so I think you see, there's the option of, I'm in a serial date. to find that guy, or I'm going to start church hopping and look for someone else. Compromise in relationships. This guy's nice. I don't think he really loves Jesus, but he'd be a good dad.
And he treats me better than the Christian guys have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, exactly. And you hear that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's an easy way to kind of start going off track, I think, from the best life that God might have. And so I know personally for me, I felt like God has asked me to just hold that with really open hands. And to trust that if God knows what the best life is for me, he knows if that's to include kids or not.
Wow.
And one thing that I feel like he's challenged me in is, like, if I believe that our God is creative, then why would I limit the scope of what he can do with the desire I have to one specific thing? Maybe I don't become a biological mother, even though I'm only 34. I think I still have time. But what if he wanted me to foster one day?
Yeah.
Or to adopt? Or to be the best auntie and come alongside friend to my friend's kids that I could be, and invest in spiritual children.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to look beyond what our immediate desires are and actually just trust God that he knows how to meet our desires.
Yeah.
I think every human being has a desire to be loved, to be known, and I think that can enter into so many different areas of our life. Like we've said, touching on like the sexual side of that, the physical side of that, the spiritual side of that, we long for companionship that is so much more intimate, I think, than friendship that we find.
Yeah.
And so I think in all of those areas, we have to learn, okay, so if my married friends, they get to enjoy sex, or they get to enjoy some of the intimacy of planning a life together, it comes back to that question of, well, how will I choose to respond if I'm not in that life stage?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's a hard question.
Totally.
It's easy for married couples to say, like, just stay pure and, like, do the right thing.
Just wait, it's worth it. Wait till you're married.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a very different story when you're living in that world. And I think especially in our culture does not make it easy to be pure.
Yeah.
I think for marrieds too, I don't think that changes. I think for anyone, it is hard, but there's unique challenges to being single and trying to stay pure in our culture. I mean, like you mentioned, I mean, it's everywhere. You can have access to cheap sex, I would say, in any way possible. It's on your phone, it's on your computer. Watch Netflix. There's sex scenes on Netflix. I'm in a book club. The books that some of my friends choose, like you get to a page and you're just like, okay, I probably shouldn't read that page.
Skip it over that one.
Yeah, it's just we're bombarded by this aspect of like, you don't have this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if that is something that you desire, which I think as sexual beings, we do desire that.
Like it's a good thing.
It is a good thing, yes.
Yeah.
But if we're not in a covenant relationship of marriage, it's not blessed by God.
Yeah.
It's just not for right now.
Yeah.
And I think that can be really hard to say to someone or to say to yourself.
Yeah.
But I think truthfully, if we want to honor God, we want to honor ourselves and the person that he's made us to be, as well as someone else, we can't cheapen sex to experience.
Yeah. And I think that's really the heart of it, is it's an experience. Like it's a moment.
Yeah.
And even having worked through and done some programs for sexual addiction, for men primarily, but I think, we're humans, men and women.
Yeah.
Like hormones come into play.
Absolutely,
the chemicals in your brain.
Yeah.
There's a physiological, there's also a spiritual warfare. Like it becomes a very complex thing.
Absolutely.
And we have a mixed bag of desires that some are God-given.
Yeah.
Like I want to be married, I want to be intimate. But then some are distorted, and it's like, I just want to have self-gratifying pleasure.
Yeah.
And I think for, that question of, like, what do you do then when you have those longings or urges, because we are physical beings, how do you respond to that in a healthy way as a single? When you said the cheap sex outlets are all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's, one click away, and like, how do you respond to that in a healthy way?
Well, and I think as a single, and that's part of what is tricky about knowing how to respond, is I feel like a lot of people don't actually know how you're doing in the area of sexual purity, because you might live on your own, or even if you have roommates, you have your own room.
Yeah.
Right, and so you kind of have that distance of space. And I'll be honest, I can probably count on one hand how many times someone has asked me how I'm doing with my sexual purity, outside of when I've been dating.
Wow.
It's like they realize when you're dating that there's temptation, but people aren't always checking. And maybe it's more because I'm a woman, I'm not sure. But that's just the reality for me.
There's assumptions.
Yeah, there's assumptions. But I think everyone has coping mechanisms that we go to. So whether it's sexual addiction or whether it's, loneliness, we find ways that we can medicate those longings or those desires.
Yeah.
And so, that could be porn or masturbation, but it could be things like Netflix.
Yeah.
Falling asleep to TV all of the time.
Yeah.
It can be overworking or exercising or eating unhealthy.
Yeah.
It can be being in relationships that are really codependent and not life-giving. And I personally have found the only way to deal with some of those things, because keeping it to myself, you can get into spirals of shame, which makes it harder for anyone to even know, because the more you indulge in anything, the more you want to hide it.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
And I really believe that's where we have to invite community into our lives.
Wow.
I don't think there's any other way. Yes, we need God, we need His Holy Spirit to work in our life, but we need community because we need boundaries.
Yeah.
We need to have some of those lines that if we cross, we tell someone.
Yeah.
I highly recommend for any sort of struggle, no matter which one it is, that you have someone trusted in your life that you can talk to about those issues, and you can ask them to walk with you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a text that you do every day that's an accountability text. How were you today on X, Y, or Z? Or how are you responding to this situation? And just having someone that you're journeying with that's going to check in on you. But there's the other side of it too, where on your end of things, you need to be vulnerable about it.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Oh yeah.
That's really hard to do. It takes courage.
Especially, I think, in our individualistic culture,
Yes.
which is so built on image and presentation. It's like people don't want to let other people in.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I also find it interesting that you brought up kind of like the antidote, if you will, is inviting community in. Because I think, inherently community implies a level of intimacy and relationship. And I feel like so many of our coping mechanisms and addictions are kind of an intimacy deficiency.
Yes.
Where it's like we lack intimacy in our relationships, so we find other ways to fulfill ourselves.
Yeah.
It's just kind of we were wired for relationship, for intimacy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so community, I think, is part of the answer to that. And I know, personally, I struggle to be vulnerable. It's not an easy thing.
Yeah, all of us.
It's like, does anyone want to hear my crap? No.
Yeah, how I let myself down again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Darn it, I have to tell them. But I really do think it's the only way to kind of move forward and to see change. And I think on top of that, I would say, community is one aspect, and then bringing it back to that relationship piece with God too. I don't think we can underestimate just the importance of being in that space where, if I'm dealing with something, I'm probably operating out of a place where I feel a sense of lack. And I'm trying to fill that hole with something, that medication, that thing that's going to make me feel better, instead of actually dealing with whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
And so if it's loneliness, I need to come back to God, and I need to be filled with the truth that, God's with me, that He has a good plan for me. Even as a single, God has a good plan for me. And really trusting Him with that.
Yeah.
And even getting to that place might take community. But I think getting to that place is really what matters.
Yeah. And it would have been maybe some practical, tangible things. Because I think, a lot of times going to God is the answer. But then I think some people think, well, how? Or why? I've tried praying. I've tried reading my Bible. I got bored, and I ended up just going back to my coping mechanism anyways. What are some things that you've done that have really helped you connect with God in a truly intimate manner?
Some things that I've done before, and it's linked me with community and with God, have been to kind of go through a scripture series with someone.
Okay.
So maybe I'm reading through the Psalms this month, and I have a friend that's also reading through the Psalms. And so in the morning, I pull out that Psalm, and I'll just start and pray and say, God, speak to me through this passage. Give me ears to hear from you. And then taking some time to read through it and reflect on it. I journal a lot. I'm a big journaler.
Okay.
I've got a box of journals for my life. If I die, I'm like, please burn them. No one needs to read these.
You're not going to turn them into books?
Absolutely not. No one wants to read what's in my journals.
That's awesome.
But I think it's a way for me to communicate with God. And then during the week, if I'm reading through these scriptures or these words from God that are speaking to me, to kind of talk to someone else about it, it brings back that kind of sense of community on the journey. And so it allows me to connect kind of vertically and horizontally. And I think that can be really key, because I get lazy in my walk with God too, and I need accountability in that area.
Yeah.
And someone's like, how's your scripture reading going this week?
Yeah.
That might just be enough of a nudge for me to be like, oh, I'm going to go read my Bible tonight.
Yeah.
And that might be exactly what I need to kind of get that closeness back. And I think coming back to that, like that kind of like void or that lack, as singles, I think when we compare ourselves to, you know, married couples or people who maybe seem to be where we want to be, we can feel like we are in a place of deficit.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? In the comparison game.
Oh yeah, they're further ahead.
They're further
they have
ahead.
more.
Yeah. I'm one, they're four. You know, like there's so many ways you can calculate it.
Totally.
But I think if we realize that in Christ, like we're found in Christ, we have everything, we lack nothing. We operate out of a place of needing to fill a hole. It's like God's oozing out of us. And I think that's where the hope is that we get in our relationship with God, is like, God, you've given me everything to live a satisfied, beautiful life.
Yeah.
Anything else, you know, the companionship, sex, whatever the things are that your heart desires, those are bonuses.
Yeah.
We don't have to have them to have a really beautiful life.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of that shift of perspective as we're filled with more of Christ where that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so good. And you even think the framing of them as bonuses is almost like extra good, but it's kind of like more like optional almost. It's like it's not better, it's not more than, it's not like, oh, you got the bonus and I didn't, you know? Or it's like, you know, in the office, you're like, I didn't get a year-end bonus, what the heck?
I mean, I do bring that up with my friends with kids. I'm like, the bonus of like, I sleep through the nights, you don't.
Yeah, totally.
See you at the end of a party, right?
There's a payoff.
There's a payoff.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But I think another interesting too that just came to mind about like the whole emotional aspect of some of those longings, like unfulfilled longings.
Yeah.
And this is something you're gifted in is worship. And I know singing might not be for everyone, but I would almost want to challenge and encourage everyone that there's something about the act of praising God. Like worship is a full life thing, but truly like through singing, the singing aspect of worship, there's an emotional satisfaction with that I think is almost one of the ways that God meets us in that emptiness.
Absolutely.
It's like, I wish I had the emotional satisfaction of physical intimacy or whatever, but like actually connecting with God through worship might be kind of that. Yeah.
And I think that's actually really key, and I think an aspect of that touches on is, I remember my dad saying when I was a kid, like, your emotions can be in the driver's seat, or you can pull your emotions along. And I think in a sense what you're doing when you're worshiping is you're telling your mind and your body and your spirit, like, we're going to worship God. And you almost like pull those emotions towards God. And I think that when we do that, there's a shift in us, because then the spirit has room to move. And the things that we long for even change. It's like, yes, I long for these things, but like, oh God, I long for you more. And that's really what you want to get to, I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much for sharing on those challenges and just how you've navigated some of those issues. And I think in closing, I know that, you know, we are members of the church. You attend a different church, obviously, than I do. But the church hasn't always been the best community for facilitating singles necessarily. Maybe some churches do better than others. But I think for a lot of singles that they try to find where they fit in, where they belong. And so maybe you could just close by speaking to that a bit. Like, how can the church do a better job of welcoming in singles and facilitating an actual life-giving environment to be a single in the church?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. I think it's so pertinent. And, you know, I'm a part of the church, so I put myself in there with the messy, trying to figure it out piece. But there's definitely a few things that would come to mind when you say that. I think the first thing is, I think we really need to challenge how we speak about singleness and marriage in the church by projecting, you know, this life that we're all heading towards marriage. Because I think when we do that, marriage is great, but not everyone will get married. We kind of set people up for failure. Because, you know, if everyone's always telling me when you get married, if that doesn't happen, all of a sudden I'm disappointed at God, I'm disappointed with others. You know, I think, you know, again, there could be something wrong with me.
Yeah, I am a disappointment.
I'm a disappointment, you know, kind of that, like, I'm not where I'm supposed to be feeling. And I think that can cause us to feel that we're not running the race that Christ has called us to, instead of embracing it. And so I think we need to shift a bit in our language around marriage. I also think that we need to come alongside singles and help them develop vision and purpose for a life of singleness. So again, kind of coming back from that assumption that we're all going to get married, I think we actually need to take time and to explore what your life could look like if you don't get married.
Yeah.
And so, people in your church are going to have different talents, different aspects of creativity and ways that they can give and serve. And if we just make them a junior varsity team that's waiting to be called up once they get married, they're not going to use their gifts. They're not going to serve. There isn't a place for them.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a time and a space to sit down and to really imagine, what could a life with Christ look like if you are single? Where, maybe we could ask better questions around it. How are you gifted?
Yeah.
How can we pray with you on the journey to encourage you in your singleness?
Yeah.
And just like to kind of come alongside and not to have such a one-sided focus.
And not just pray for a spouse.
Exactly.
We pray you'll find a spouse someday.
Yeah, and it's not wrong to pray for a spouse if that's something you desire, but that can so easily become the focus.
Yes.
And you miss this beautiful season of your life that you could be, seeing so many amazing things in the kingdom that God wants to do through your life.
Yeah.
And so just kind of shifting a little bit in that way. Another thing that I think is so important in the church is that we make space for singles at all levels of leadership. Because if we believe that singleness is a gift, I mean, look at Jesus, Paul, there's so many prophets in the Old Testament that never got married.
Yeah.
None of them were disqualified from serving because they were single.
Yeah.
We need to hear the voices of singles in our church. We need to make space to use their gifts.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of singles, they might not have even thought about it.
Yeah.
Because that projection of always heading towards marriage has maybe been there.
Yeah.
And so maybe the greatest way the church can encourage them is to even say, have you thought about this?
Right.
What could the potential be?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is huge is celebration. I don't know about in your church, I'm guessing it's pretty much the same everywhere, but we celebrate relationship change.
Yeah.
And so all of our celebrations, for the most part, I would say, revolve around, someone got engaged, now they got married, and the next thing is someone's having a baby, and then it's the baby's birthdays.
Yeah.
And for a single, it's like, you can celebrate their birthday, but we probably celebrated your birthday too.
Yeah.
I think we need to find ways to celebrate milestones in singles' lives so that they feel included and celebrated and valued.
Yeah.
And in that way, I think we stop kind of like pitying a single.
Yeah.
We encourage them in who God's made them to be and celebrate the things that He is doing instead of focusing on the things that He's not doing.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, I feel like something that a lot of people, they're so busy in their own lives, spouse, children, whatever it is. It's almost like the church needs to celebrate them because they don't have the capacity or margin themselves necessarily. But then the singles, it's like, they got all the time in the world. They don't need us to help them or step in. I'm sure they'll have their own parties and their own this and their own that.
Yeah.
And we just kind of assume that, they don't need any of us.
Right. Yeah.
But you're saying actually that's missing the boat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's why probably the last thing I would add to that list of things the church could do would be, find spaces to invite marrieds and singles to engage with each other. Because I think when you're up close and personal, that's where you see what those needs might be.
Yeah.
I think if we kind of segregate by whether it's by age or by, your relationship status, we first of all, we don't even know how to support each other.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what each other's needs are.
Yes.
But I also think it's healthy because it breaks down, those walls of comparison because we see real life.
Oh yeah.
Right? And invite a single into your family. I've been invited into families.
Yeah.
I realize that marriage is really hard.
Yeah.
That raising kids is not easy.
Oh, it's messy.
And it doesn't make me not want it, but it makes me appreciate things about my singleness as well.
Yeah.
It makes me know how to pray for my married friends.
Yeah.
My married friends don't know how to pray for singles unless they spend time with singles.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think there's more of an overlap of our lives being shared.
Yeah.
That could happen in community that would really strengthen how we care for one another.
Yeah, so good. I love that. And for myself, having been a single adult for many, many years, I have so many of my friendships are married people.
Yeah.
And being a third wheel has become like a profession for me. I've done lots of third wheel vacations, third wheel trips, third wheel dinners, you name it. Sometimes fifth wheel, It's an area of growth for me. But third wheel, I got locked down. And I love it because For me too, actually, it provides a really healthy space for relationship with the opposite gender that doesn't get weird, because it's my buddy's wife.
Yeah.
Rather than like, it's really good to have friends of the same gender, different gender, that's, we should. But then, for people who may struggle with that a bit more, it's like have married friends who you can get along with your friend's spouse.
Absolutely.
And then you can have such fulfilling, meaningful conversations, and it doesn't have to get weird.
Exactly.
Or feel like you're crossing any lines, because you're like, oh yeah, I'm with, my friend's spouse.
Definitely. And on that note too, there's wisdom, that married couples have that they've learned in their life that you don't have yet as a single.
Yeah.
And there may be things you've learned as a single from having been single longer that your married friends don't have.
Yeah.
And so again, there's just like that cross kind of sharing.
Yeah, you sharpen each other.
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah.
That's great. So good. Thank you for sharing those thoughts, and definitely lots of ways that the church can grow in making room and just making good community for singles. But April, I just want to thank you for all the things you have shared tonight, like just being open and honest with us about your journey, the highs, the lows, like you mentioned. I just wonder if there's any closing thoughts that you want to leave us with as we go from here today.
Yeah, I think one thing that has been kind of resonating with me is, I've processed my own journey of singleness. I think that we talk about singleness, and because singleness is a gift, sometimes we view it a certain way. In 1 Corinthians 7:7, it talks about, how everyone's been given a different gift in seasons. It could be marriage, it could be singleness. And Paul goes on to write in verse 17, that we're called to live in whatever gift it is that we've been given. And I think sometimes we see someone who is living their single life, and they're maybe very joyful about how they live their life, and we just kind of assume, they've been given a gift they wanted, the gift of singleness. And so that's why they're a happy single, and this single is not so happy.
Yeah.
And we can kind of make that like calling versus what have you been given.
Right.
But if you think of a gift, the intent of a gift is actually on the side of the giver, not on the side of the receiver. In the same way, the intention of it. And so I think in my own life, I've realized whether I've desired marriage or singleness is not actually where I'm going to find the joy in the gift.
Right.
It's trusting that God gives good gifts.
Yes.
And so if He's given me this gift of singleness right now, I want to steward it in a way where I trust that God's given me something good. And that as I unpack it, I can be real with Him about what's hard, about the frustrations, about some of those things we've talked about. But I can also see it with potential and see it as, God knows me. He knows what He's created me for. He knows what He's designed me for. And so there's goodness in this gift.
Yeah.
And I think the more that I've chosen to explore that, the more that I found joy in the gift of singleness. And it doesn't mean I don't want marriage, but it means that I don't have to live a single life that feels lacking or that feels joyless. And I do have to say, just speaking to some of the struggles that come with singleness, the loneliness, the more joy I have in what God has given me, the less those things are apparent in my life. And they're less of a struggle because I'm really living into the purpose of who I was created to be.
Yeah.
And so I just encourage all of us to look at what God's given us as a gift. And to entrust that He knows the best path for our life.
Yeah, so like whether it's the unfulfilled desires, whether it's the loneliness, whether it's the temptations, you're saying joy offsets those things.
Joy is so key.
Yeah,
it's so key.
that's good.
Yeah.
Focus on joy. Wow.
Yeah.
April, thank you so much
So
for sharing with us. This was so fruitful and enjoyable for me. So I just want to, thank you again for that.
You're so welcome. Anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, who knows? We might have you back again sometime then. But great. Well, thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation tonight with April. And just remember to stick around, subscribe, like, however you want to stay in track with us. We're going to be having a lot more of these interviews to come. And share with any friends that you might think could be able to benefit from a message like this, to grow in wisdom and understanding of how to make the most of your singleness. But with that being said, that's all we have for this time. So love you guys and take care.